Welcome to the Timothy Kenny Podcast. Today I'm here with Dr. John Thomas Sullivan, more well known as J.T. O'Sullivan, former NFL quarterback of several teams, including the Patriots, my home team. And I'm going to talk to him today about more the intellectual side of being a quarterback, being in the NFL, his thoughts on head coaching and the different parts of the offense, and also just how he organizes his information, how he memorizes things. We're going to get into his flashcards. How I first discovered him on YouTube, watching his channel, the QB School, is a video on how he learns offenses and how he learned offenses when he joined each new team, his flashcard system. We're going to get into that. So, JT, let's start with your background overall. Can you talk about the teams you've been on, and then also your transition from the NFL, going to school, and what you're doing today, teaching your leadership class at University of San Diego, and the other things you're involved in?
Yeah, sure. So football has been part of my journey kind of the entire time through athletics. Grew up playing every kind of sport possible, but then when you get into actually the league, got drafted in the 6th round and basically bounced around to a third of the league. And so it's difficult for me to do the mental gymnastics of the kind of linear path, but essentially the Saints, all of the NFC North, the Patriots, the Panthers, some practice squad stops there, the Niners, the Bengals, the Chargers, the Raiders, and I finished up in Canada. And so about halfway through that, really goes walking it back a little bit more, when I went to a Division II non-scholarship school for collegiate athletics. So I was never necessarily thinking NFL on the horizon. And so I was always thinking, hey, I wanted to coach. And really, most coaches aspire to coach at the highest level possible. So I always thought, hey, I would love to be a NFL head coach, general manager, pull the strings, make the decisions, those type of things.
Right.
Then the longer I was in the league, the more I want nothing at all to do with that lifestyle. And I just moved around so much, I knew I wanted to kind of be located in one spot. And so that kind of limits those type of opportunities. And so, but I still didn't really know what I wanted to do about halfway through my career in the league. But I knew that I loved sports, and I knew that I liked education. And so the NFL does a thing where they'll give you a stipend once you're a vested player for a certain amount of money every year to use towards education. And really, it's for guys who come out early to go back and get their undergraduate, is the intent of the rule.
Right.
But you can use it for graduate degrees. And so was going back to school to get my master's, basically the second half of my career, and I realized that I kind of liked it, and I was kind of good at school.
So the second half, while you're still in the NFL, you were going at master's.
So
okay.
In the off season.
Okay.
And so it was great, and I enjoyed it. And it was a different. Not that football got boring, but there are really only so many things you can do with 11 or 22 people on the field. And so I liked the kind of new challenge, being challenged intellectually in different paths, and just naturally curious in that regard. And so I enjoyed going back to school. Well, now fast forward to a half decade later, finish up the master's, and realize that I really liked it and would like to continue to do it. And I had was going to go to Canada to try to give it a go and see if I enjoyed that process, and I did, but it wasn't for me long term. And so I had kind of used a year to study for the GRE, took the GRE, and all of a sudden was looking for doc programs to apply to. And there was one, I'm in San Diego, and there was one that I really liked at the University of San Diego through their School of Leadership and Education, and applied, got in, and that really was kind of the gap for me. They talk a lot about professional athletes having a really hard time transitioning from being a player to whatever comes next. And for me, I used that kind of information beforehand to realize, okay, I want to line up a bridge. And I used that doctorate as kind of a bridge to figure out whatever was next. Not that I necessarily knew what was next, but I knew I wanted to have kind of the broadest kind of toolkit that I possibly could to be successful in the next kind of phase. And so, and I really loved, I had a great experience going back to finish a PhD. Now, obviously, not all of it is great. Writing a dissertation is a beast, and obviously a lot of the stuff is a challenge, but I really enjoyed it. And so it ticked that box of bridge, challenging, opened up a bunch of new doors. And so I explored intercollegiate athletic administration for a while as opposed to coaching. And then when I was done with school, all of a sudden I had this huge time available. And so I like I've always loved athletics. I've always loved education. There's a natural mixture in the States to have, that education amateurism model, and was just looking to see exactly where it fit for me. And all of a sudden I had been out of football long enough to heal, probably isn't the right word, but at least be interested in it again. And so I started this YouTube channel kind of exploring what that space looked like because for a number of different reasons, but I have a brother who's a cinematographer who helped me set the whole rig up. But then beyond that, it was just interesting. I could pick and choose what I wanted to do and got back into it from there, and then realized, I kind of like this, and got applied for a head coaching job in a high school and got it. So that's kind of where my world blends with that. Now I also do, as you mentioned, I teach a course at the University of San Diego where I went to school as adjunct faculty, a course called Leadership in Sports. And really that course, I created a curriculum for it, so obviously I hope I should like it, but it basically, you take the trajectory of what it's like at every level of sports, from youth sports to scholastic sports to collegiate athletic sports to professional sports to being a fan to being a community member to being an executive, and kind of that entire kind of path of what it looks like on a journey of sports. And so I love it. It's a lot of fun for me to mix those worlds of leadership, influence, and sports.
And how rare is it? Because I was thinking, like, the other big name I can think of who's done something real academic with the NFL is Chris Collinsworth, because I think he got his law degree while he was playing, right, or soon after, and so and he's now one of the top commentators. You mentioned that you really enjoyed getting the PhD. A lot of people would think, why would you, if you're a quarterback or you play sports, why would you do that? So is that going back to your childhood? You've always enjoyed learning, or?
No, well, not that connected in that dot, no. I
Okay.
think there was an element of, I remember, I have a mental model of my father when I was young, going back to law school. So it wasn't anything out of the ordinary to see someone studying or have kind of that path as something that's the norm. You got to kind of get up early, stay up late, those type of things. It's not a normal age student. So that part of it. And the other part of it, to be honest with you, is a little bit money driven. I was a non-scholarship student athlete. So when I see the NFL offer, hey, we're going to give you this stipend to go back to school, well, I'm like, well, that's free money. Like I feel like I need to take advantage of that, or I'm not maximizing what this opportunity is. So that's another element of it. Then I just kind of fell into the fact that, like, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known that leadership studies was an academic field. And so, to marry things, I was an English undergrad, and it really wasn't necessarily because I loved the English language. It was because, that's kind of where my coaches nudged me. And so it was fun for me to find something that I liked, and not necessarily, the academic research and rigor behind the field that I didn't know anything about before I necessarily got into it, but could appreciate from a researcher standpoint. But this idea of influencing people, mobilizing groups towards, moving towards kind of an agreed upon goal, those type of things are relatable, and I can use that in any field. And so that was kind of the major motivation in that kind of sense.
Are there other NFL players that you know of that have gone down this track, gotten a PhD?
I'm sure there are. There's a pretty famous one of a guy who was actually playing while he was doing it pretty recently for the Ravens. His name escapes me. I actually have his book. John something, a mathematician. And
I remember that. Yep.
I'm less of an academic by any means. I didn't go pursue a doctorate to become kind of a tenured faculty track by any means.
Okay.
And so, I'm sure that there are a number of guys, just since I've been in the kind of world of advanced education or advanced degrees, where I've, know a bunch of others that have medical degrees, that have law degrees, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's the norm, but it's definitely not like an extreme outlier where nobody ever does it. I think more people do it than probably are recognized.
You said in one of your videos that your sense of, or your, I don't know how to describe it, your resilience that you developed in football helped with the PhD or just being in academics. How do you think that your unique background helped you learn or helped you in academia? And and handle all those challenges.
Yeah, I do agree with that the kind of a resilience as a learned skill is something that I've benefited from. And it's a combination of experience and intention, in my opinion. It's I was cut 7 times in the NFL. And so I was passed over and wasn't given a scholarship coming out of high school. So I understand what it's like to have an idea in my head of what I value my own worth at, and then perhaps what that being different than what the outside world does, and saying, you know what, I'm gonna bridge those gaps. I think I can make this change. I think I can elevate my status in that regard. And it doesn't matter necessarily what one person thinks. In the NFL, there's a famous saying that every time you play, you're auditioning for the entire league.
Yeah.
And it's true. But if you're really not auditioning, not only are you auditioning for the entire league, it only takes one. That's what that's the thing about it. Is 31 teams can hate you, think you're a joke.
Yeah.
You need that one team to draft you, and then you got a chance. And so it's that was always my thinking, where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna prove this dude wrong. I'm gonna prove this organization wrong, or I'm gonna prove this school wrong for not giving me a scholarship. And that I'm not sure where that necessarily came from, but that's just always been my take on it and my approach, and it fit well in the football world and kind of that like bottom half of an NFL roster world, where you do have to have some, hey, got cut, on to the next. And I tell our players nowadays, like, next play, like those type of things, where the only one that matters is the next one. And that's kind of given me the kind of platform and understanding to be okay with that type of failure, that type of letdown, knowing that, I got enough belief in myself, because I know how much I've worked to give myself this opportunity, that I think that there'll be another one around the corner.
Yeah, and there's another saying that I've heard with quarterbacks of, you have to have a memory like a goldfish. And it's an interesting paradox of, on one hand, you have to have more information in your head than almost anybody else on the team. And the flip side is, you have to be able to sort of disconnect from the previous play or the interception or whatever and immediately get back into things. So how do you think about that? I mean, is that what would you call that as a skill? And is that something that you talk about in your leadership class, or you see as a component of leadership? Because it seems connected with resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would come at it. I wouldn't disagree that there's an element of playing quarterback, that there is a short memory thing, but it's a little bit of kind of a short-sighted analysis, if I would say. My thing that I always looked at was, what's the long-term objective of what we're doing right now? Is it to win a championship? Is it to win the game? So if I'm in the game and I turn the ball over, well, the objective is not lost. I still am focused on exactly winning that game. So I'm not necessarily going to be so tethered to the moment that I lose track of the long-term objective. And that goes to, okay, we lose a game. We lose a couple games. Well, what's the objective? Was the objective to go 2-0, or was the objective to win a championship? And so that capacity to hold that, what I think are multiple levels, right? So if you're holding the long-term objective in your mind, you also have to be able to disconnect that to the short-term, what's next, what's right, what's on that path to get to that objective. But if you lose that step, if you don't take the right step every single time, well, shake it off. Let's go. We're on to the next. And so it's not so much everything must be perfect. I'm a big fan of good enough. There's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, have an issue with this type of thinking. But for me, I'm always thinking, what's good enough? Is this good enough for us to move forward? Yeah, let's go. That's good enough. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be done, and we got to be good enough to have a chance to stay on that path towards that long-term objective.
There's I think it was in your Wikipedia I read, it said you had a Jesuit education. Was that K through 12 or college?
That was just high school.
That was just high school?
I grew up going to a parochial Catholic school, and then just the Jesuit element of it was high school. I went to a high school in Sacramento called Jesuit High School.
And I don't know a lot about the Jesuit education, but my understanding is that it's known to be one of the most rigorous sort of systems of learning. So is there anything that you draw from that, or anything unique you can tell us about what that's like, or any learning habits you built, or organizational habits you built through that?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably mirror your understanding of it. That's probably my understanding of it too. The only thing I would add is going through the experience. I usually tell people that my high school kind of academic curriculum and that environment of where everyone was so focused on that academic setting.
Yep.
It was really challenging for me at the time. I was not ready for that, as a freshman in high school. I remember being shocked at my class rank, and, those type of things where, like, I didn't even know that was a thing, so it was unsettling for me. The other part that I really liked about it was that was all throughout high school, whether it was a theology class, whether it was any sort of, academic field, you're constantly being challenged. And it was a lot of Socratic method, a lot of not knowing. And when you come to that realization that, we can do this, we can learn together as a collective, both individually and as a collective, and be okay with being challenged with what I think. And even having, Jesuits who, just to your point, spend nearly 20 years with their preparation in this academic theology to then challenge their own thinking and then push it back on the group and see that type of vulnerability and really understanding that, they don't necessarily have the answers either. Those type of realizations when you're at that type of age for me was really fortunate. And I remember cherishing those type of things. It's just one of those things that's so out of the ordinary coming from someone who now has kids in the public education system. I do think that there is, whatever your theological leaning is, it's that type of philosophical challenge and openness to not only one dogma, but understanding multiple layers of what that looks like, both historically and globally, depending on, if you're not in America, those type of settings I think are fascinating and really important at that age where you're so, mendable in how you think, not only what you think, but how you think. And so for me, absolutely that impacted me.
I want to quickly go over the different levels of, and maybe we can use the Patriots as an example because that's just the one I'm familiar with, but it's probably largely the same team to team. I'm curious and then I want to zoom into the stuff that you've shown in your videos on the playbook and flashcards and stuff. But I'm curious, what is the overall structure of the knowledge or the information of a team? I think most people would think about, okay, there's a playbook and there's that sheet of paper that the head coach holds and stuff like that. But I'm wondering what other components that people might not think of that are key parts of the key information resources or whatever you want to call it, that are part of every team and stuff that players learn and quarterbacks especially learn.
Yeah, so are you talking about just playing quarterback on the field, or are you talking organizational wide? Like, what kind of metrics and variables are they capturing that are essential to how they operate?
I'm not as much asking about the analytics. It's more like, are there other things besides a playbook that are things that, and to the extent that that's transferable to anybody who runs a business or works in a business, that are sort of similar but maybe have a different name for it in the football world?
I'm not sure if there is anything necessarily unique. I think it's probably magnified just because of the dollars associated with some of your employees. If you, very rare is it in most fields to have a 20-year-old as your new most important employee and you're paying them millions of dollars. You obviously have a different level of investment. And I've been on teams that I would say are probably tilted towards heavy involvement in their kind of off-season professional, not more like personal development, as far as what it's like life skills, as a general term. Right. But it really depends on the organization, the team. Are you a veteran-heavy team? Are you a younger team in the league? About how they do their resources. But for the vast majority of them, there's only 32 teams. They're almost all structured very similarly. I think that there obviously are some massive differences when you get to the top and the bottom. But for the vast majority of them, they're pretty much the same when it comes to that.
So I think now would be a good time to take a look at your flashcards, and maybe you could just give us, I don't want to go, because I'm going to put a link to your video, and there's a number of videos that I'm going to put in the description to this video that people can watch and get a full picture of this. But I just wanted to, when I first saw this case, this like briefcase or whatever you call it, this case, it's like, I've never seen one that big, and the amount of flashcards you have is just insane. So I was really impressed when I first saw it. And I mean, I think it's really important that people just see this, because this is what it means to take things to the next level. And you need I think part of what's so interesting about being a quarterback is you have to have so much information ready, and it has to be at that intuitive level. And so you need to take it to this extreme to really get to that point. So maybe you could just show us the case, what's inside it, one of your sets of flashcards, and maybe show us one card and kind of explain it briefly. And that'll give people an idea, and then they can go watch the full, I think it's like a 20-minute video if they want to know more about it.
Yeah, so, and this is kind of, it's tethered to my own journey a little bit about how I learn necessarily per se. So it's one of those things for me. I have always learned, like I remember being in high school and having vocab cards, and I just thought that it resonated with me well. And so this is how I kind of did it. No one ever necessarily told me to do it this way. But for me, it's this is just a culmination. So you can see it without it falling out.
Yeah.
I actually have another case that has probably half full. But the idea being here is that when I was young in the league, I really wanted to make sure that I became an expert in my kind of position. That was always what people tell you. I remember Mike McCarthy, who's now the head coach at the Cowboys, telling me, become an expert, become a master of what you're being asked to do. And so that was really what I took to heart my first couple years in the league. And so basically just created a playbook of flashcards. And so for me, at this time, I thought that I learned very linear. And so I wanted to understand, if we call a play, by the personnel group, who's on the field, then we do a motion, a shift, then we do a formation, then we do a protection, then we do a concept, which is very kind of linear in how every football team basically operates. Well, I wanted to learn in that order. So I learned all the personnels. I learned all the shifts and motions. I learned all the formations. I learned all the protections, all the concepts. And so then I would just kind of create these flashcards. And, when you create flashcards that are that in-depth, you learn why you create them. And so that was one of the reasons I did it. And the other reason was I just kept quizzing myself. And I, whether I was doing cardio at the gym, whether I was watching TV during commercials back in the day when you used to have to watch commercials,
right?
Those type of things. Like for me, that's just how I did it. And so when you do that for one team and it worked for me, I thought it worked. Then when I go to a new team, I do it immediately. I get the playbook and go from there. And so then people started thinking like, oh, this guy, I wouldn't necessarily advertise that this is how I was doing it. I just did it that way for my own learning. And then it got to the point where they're like, oh, this guy, he can come in and help us because he'll learn it quickly. And I got the reputation for being someone who could come in, learn it quickly, and be able to be a kind of serviceable guy in the league. And so,
and what would it look like when you're just sitting down? Because people might be thinking, is this going to, was this a one-time thing where you sit down with a playbook that I'm guessing has 100, 200 plays and you just do it all? Like, would this take you an entire day to do it, or would you split it up into doing it an hour at a time? Because a lot of people don't want to do flashcards because it just seems really boring and time consuming.
And it is.
Yeah, it is.
It's in the football world, most teams and organizations do installations over the course of time. And so I would do it depending on the organization. If I was an organization that had invested in me, that they would give me the whole playbook, then I'd just jump into it and do it myself. But if I was on most teams where they would install it kind of as we go, every day you get a different installation.
And we should just define what that word is. And for people that want to get some more detail on this, I was just watching your quarterback coach video today, and you talked about some of these installation things, and you talked about you install with the whole team and then you do breakout sessions. But in installation, my understanding is it's the coach or some coaches get in front of a big room and they're sort of installing in each play, and they're telling you, okay, this is what everybody does for this play. This is why. Then they move to the set. Is that a good description of it, or?
Yeah, I think the way that I think of it is it's very similar to if you've been in an undergraduate situation where you're in a huge hall where there would be a class of 200 people, and the professor gets up there and gives kind of the core tenets of whatever your top following or your topic, and then all of a sudden later in the week you have what's usually called a discussion group or something where you have to go with like a GA or TA, and they go into breakout sessions. So really the offensive unit or offense or defensive unit you're in, the coordinator would get up and install usually a handful of every element. So they'd probably put in a new shift, a new motion, a new formation, a new personnel, a new run, a new pass, a new play action, a new trick play. So you'd have like a chunk of these things that would fall under that installation category.
Is this during the off season, or is this like a one-time install that you do in the off season for all the new players, or is this just trying to put this together? Is this like an incremental thing that you're supposed to get up to speed on your own, and then they're just adding little things each week?
So that's a good question. It's yes. So it's in the off season, it's the core kind of base offense, but then every day during the season, every day, meaning in the NFL world, the NFL week is basically Wednesday to Sunday. So Wednesday you'd have meetings like this, Thursday you'd have meetings like this, Friday you'd have meetings like this, and during the season they're chunked into more situations. Like Wednesday is your normal base down and distance day. Thursday is usually your red zone, or not red zone, third down, high red zone day. Friday is your low red zone, goal line, short yardage day. And so those same installations would happen on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But really, you have those installations, then you break out and go to the position-specific coach, where you basically either go over it again or kind of get into the questions, details. This didn't make sense. Hey, how are we reading this? It's a little bit different for every position.
Okay.
And so that's how I would chunk the index cards.
Okay.
I wouldn't do it during the season. This is more of just to have the best understanding of the system that I possibly could.
So they call it. They say they trade, or they hire you. Let's say in the spring, and then you're doing this over the first month or two before camp, and then so you come to camp and like this is what you've done to prepare as the flashcards.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So I would come in. I've never been to a camp where I felt really good, because this is what my method was.
How much time did you take? Like, did you have a sense of I'm going to need a month or two to get all this?
I never really thought in kind of calendar terms. For me, I just kind of knew that I never stopped, if that makes sense. So it wasn't like all of a sudden, like, I did a month of this, we're good. Like, if we started camp in the middle of July, I just did the flashcards as fast as I could, and then I took the flashcards everywhere I went. And so instead of having like a book with me or like checking my phone, I did the flashcards.
And were you sitting down and doing them an hour at a time, or like actually creating them? What was that like?
I honestly can't remember exactly if there wasn't necessarily a time frame. It was more of most of the installations they would give you either the night before or the day before. And so I would usually just print them out and start, and if I didn't finish them, I'd do them the next day. And so it wasn't that, overwhelming when you chunk it out like that.
Is a playbook just pictures of the diagram of the offense and defense, or is there like a page of instructions that go along with that diagram? Like what is that? And I think you said you had a playbook. Can you show us anything in there, or if that would be useful? Wow. So were they always that big, or I was going to get to that question later, but it seems like just in the last 10, 20 years, things have gotten a lot more intense.
Well, I think now they're all done on like iPads, but I would say this is normal size, if not small. I'd say most of these would be filled all the way to the brim. The answer to the question is how they're drawn up is it's usually a image and then text underneath it is kind of the core elements. This one's probably the one I picked up is different. Yeah, so let's see if you can even see this. Not sure if it'll focus on it or not. It's basically the top half of it is diagrams, and then there's text underneath it.
Okay, yeah, it's focused, yep.
And so it's just that's probably how most of them are, and then there's just more pages of every type of different example that you could possibly see. So it's definitely overkill.
So there's got to be, it looks like there'd be 1,000 of those, or like 500 different variations in there.
Yeah, there's at least and this is just one example. There's probably 15 to 20 for every single protection. That was just the protections.
So what are it looks like there's organizers in there. What are each of those tabs say?
depends on the team, but this one would just be general information, schedules, huddle, cadence, personnel groups, offensive line, runs, inside run, outside run, adjustments, gap runs, nickel runs. Every type of unit of an offense would get its own kind of section.
Okay. So but if there's that many variations, you've got to decide which plays you're going to include in the flashcards and then which ones you're going to leave out, right?
The flashcards were mostly, so for example, this first flashcard on this unit, I don't know if you can see it here. If it doesn't focus, it says Fox 23/23. And all that is a type of protection. And so I don't go through there and put every single front a defense could throw up there what the adjustments would be. I just know on the back of this are going to be the calls that we would make based on whatever calls they are. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that probably separated me a little bit from many, there are definitely some quarterbacks that know all the offensive line calls, but I always thought of that as something that would be able to separate me from other guys. As if I could play center, I just couldn't block anybody. I could make the calls, but I couldn't block anybody. Where I feel like maybe, the percentage is probably 25% of guys in the league could probably do that. Now, it's not the most complicated thing in the world, but especially for the protections elements, not necessarily the run game, but for the protection element, I think it is advantageous to know, like, hey, I might die here if we don't do this correctly.
So I know it's hard to put a number on it, but if you took yourself without doing this and you're a first year on a team versus you do this flashcard and you do memorize it, how much of a difference is there at the end of the day when you're actually on the field? How much of a difference does that make? Like, how would you quantify it for people that are like, well, is this putting all this extra effort in actually worth it?
Well, I mean, I would quantify it as, like most of us have probably taken a test at some level of your life.
Yeah.
Probably an important test. And there are tests where you feel like, hey, I'm as prepared as I possibly could be. Like, maybe to the max of my capacity. Doesn't mean I'm going to get 100%, but I've done everything I possibly could to prepare for this test. And you feel a sense of peace. You feel a sense of calm in those moments. That was always what I wanted to feel going into a practice, going into a game. And so that was always my intention. It was never necessarily like, any underlying kind of deep philosophical thought on it. I just wanted to be as prepared as possible. And to me, that's part of being a pro, in any field, not necessarily just athletics. But I think I probably had a little bit more kind of motive to do it just because I was always an undersized guy, barely over 6 feet, Division II, non-scholarship, just not the norm in the league circles. So I wanted to make sure I differentiated myself as much as I possibly could, and I really used it as an asset to be like, there are a few guys that on some NFL teams where you're like, that cat's probably not the sharpest dude in the world. I never wanted to be, that type of thing. I didn't want that as a negative, connotation to bringing me onto a team. I wanted the exact opposite, where I could kind of help empower and elevate a group in that kind of regard. And so it was just something that, and I to be honest with you, I liked it. Like this is the point of my life where I was like, I wanted to know, these are the best in the world at football. What are they doing that's so great? Well, in reality, like most fields, the deeper you go, the more you realize it's a lot of the same stuff. There's only so much you can do. There's not a whole lot of like totally unique innovation. And so once you learn what 11 guys can do, it doesn't matter what you call it. I can go learn it in a different language.
And that's been part of the reputation with Brady and Belichick, is they both have that sort of encyclopedic knowledge and just know everything. So did you notice that when you were on the Patriots with Brady or Belichick, or just the organization in general, that knowledge is more valued in making, like, I read something about Belichick where he'll quiz his players on, do you know this second string guy who you might go against if the first guy is injured, like stuff like that?
So that question hits me like 5 different ways. I will say that my experience with the Patriots was probably less than 2 months. I was on the practice squad. I very much enjoyed it because at that point in my career, I had only been in West Coast kind of offensive systems. And so it was fascinating on a number of levels. I had a great experience. I'm a massive fan of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. both good guys. I will say that I'll answer it in parts. First, Bill, he, in my opinion, is probably one, if not the only head coach I was ever around that I thought could be a excellent position coach for every position in an organization. So most guys have a kind of a limited capacity, whether they're an offensive guy, a special teams guy, a defensive guy, a front guy, a back end guy, where I felt like every time Bill talked, he talked with enough detail and kind of evidence that he could do that for every position on the field, which kind of creates this kind of idiosyncratic credit that not many other coaches have. And so the other part about that is he is famous for kind of, on the outside, people say like, he's had all these team meetings where he would quiz you, what's the third string quarterback's sister's cousin's name, like stuff like that. I never experienced something like that. I did experience probably the most unique team meeting structure that I'd ever been around, because most head coaches in that NFL week, Wednesday through Saturday, really, as far as the preparation, will have kind of short head coach meetings where they'll talk about the itinerary, the schedule, kind of macro picture stuff, where Bill was the only guy I was ever around that did all three phases. And he would have film from either the practice or the opponent or the last game. He would circle people. Tom, you play like this, we're going to lose. That never happens. That never happened in another organization I was at, where there was a lot of accountability at 8:30 in the morning, in front of the team, in front of your peers. And it was never necessarily mean-spirited. It was just brutally honest. Like the candor was unlike anything else I'd ever been around. So I appreciated that, and I think I always wanted people to just be honest with me in those type of situations. The thing about Tom, at that point in his career, was like 2005, 2006. He'd already won a bunch. He was a master at what New England was doing. I wouldn't say that I spent enough time with him to know, like, is he like a football savant or something like that. He is really good. I think at that time, people didn't realize how good of a spinner of the ball he was. Like, he could throw the ball. He was obviously a sharp guy, but I think people started to appreciate it. And I think he probably got better in his career throwing it too, towards that middle part where they were so unstoppable offensively. Yep. This was before that. So I kind of saw the ladder to how he got there and the work he was putting in. And he worked extremely hard on the practice field, but hey, it's no secret. Lots of guys work really hard. And so there are some sort of intrinsic variables that he had tethered with that organization that allowed him to kind of skyrocket. The other part that I always think is interesting in that relationship is those two guys spent more time together than any quarterback head coach I'd ever been around. And what I mean by that is, like, after practice, they would have one-on-one meetings that I can't remember, and they were regular, if not, like, I want to say, like, most days, where all the other quarterbacks, we'd be sitting around being like, can we start our meeting? I know Tom's in with Bill. What can you say? You can't be like, you're not going to break it up. You just got to kind of sit there and wait. Yeah. So I don't remember that happening in any other organization. So I do think that Bill intentionally cultivated Tom's kind of knowledge, broader understanding, kind of macro approach to what they're doing as an organization, unlike any other head coach and quarterback combination I was ever around, are kind of my main key takeaways from that experience.
Tom talked in one of his, I think the Facebook series he did, it showed some video of him going through a lot of watching a lot of video. And I saw something with Ray Lewis where he had this thing of, like, every time he'd go against Brady, he'd watch tons of video, and he sort of took that from Brady, that idea of, I need to prepare as much as he is to be able to have that same level of knowledge, to be able to read the defense, read the offense. So can you talk about that aspect of it? I mean, because once you memorize the plays, now it's more about learning week in and week out what's going on with this specific team, and what it's like watching video, watching film, and what you recommend for how people should do that. Because I saw some stuff on your website, I think with your Patreon, it's designed around quarterbacks. People who are high school, college, NFL quarterbacks can go into your school and learn how to watch film and how to prepare. So maybe you could hit that with whichever angle looks interesting to you.
So I appreciate the soft plug there. I definitely have a file on the website, the QBschool.com, where you can go and I provide a document about how to watch film. And I do think that there is a learned skill to how to watch film. It's not like watching the Fox broadcast.
Yep.
You can't just have it on. And so that's why I kind of chuckle when I hear the Ray Lewis thing, because I remember vividly Ray Lewis and Ed Reed kind of like sitting in Ray's living room on some like NFL film thing, and they're almost like legit bullshitting with each other, and like the film's just on in the background like 20 feet away. I'm like, that's not really watching film. Like I don't know those guys at all, but that's not watching film. And at the same time, I've heard stories that Tom would watch every single snap of the opponent that he's going to play Saturday night. Well, like, I'm not a mathematician, but I can tell you the amount of time it takes to watch film and the amount of time that you actually have from a Saturday night to a Sunday game, and you can't watch every single cut up. So there are ways to do it, and really there's an evolution of it, and it depends on where you're at in the preparation as far as how you watch film. So if you're trying to watch film, the first thing you throw on for a new opponent, you're probably going to go really slowly. You're probably going to say, hey, well, what are their base tendencies? What's their base front? What's their base coverages? Those type of things. And once you understand that, then you start to look for patterns. And so this is, for me, what separates a lot of people. And it's like any field. It's not like necessarily a memorized intrinsic look. It's a pattern. What does this pattern look like? Your pattern recognition accelerates the more kind of you have in your database to be able to pull from. And so if I recognize this pattern, this is what the shell, tethered to this look, this is what we're going to get based on this situation. Those are useful things that you can generate from watching film.
Are you writing that down as you're watching, or?
Yes and no. I'm always a little hesitant I was never the guy who had like the spiral binder and I was just always writing, because in my opinion, all the preparation I was doing, that's kind of why I like the flashcards, because it's logged up here. I take it with me. It's not like I'm going to say like, hey, it's the second quarter, we're in the second drive. Let me get a timeout, get over to my third down notes and be like, okay, 3rd and 7 to 10. They like to go, middle field closed, match covers. I need to be able to have that on recall. And so that I was always trying to take things that I could actually take away that I could use on the field as were the things that I was trying to generate from watching film. Now, is there some sort of like long-term, off-season kind of study stuff that you can do that stuff? Yeah, there is a time and place for it. But there's a fine line for me. I never, there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, like job justification to say like, hey, if you're a position coach or a player, like I watched 4 hours of film. Well, okay, you watch 4 hours of film. How much actual knowledge do you have you gained that can help us win this game, but, accomplish our objective on a Sunday?
What does that mean, job justification?
Job justification?
Oh, job justification. Yeah, okay.
Like saying, like, I had a bunch of coaches who would be like, I slept in the office. Like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean you're grinding, you're doing anything that's going to help us on Sunday. It's there is an element of that definitely happens in the league, and I'm sure it happens in most professions. But for me, the film watching thing was always fascinating, because it's like, I watched every snap from the team last night.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's possible. Like, it's not possible. I don't know how fast you can watch film, but if I watch it and fast forward, I can barely do that. So
you've got the flashcards, you've got the playbook, and you're watching film. Is there any other components? Are there books you're reading on while you're in the NFL? Are there books you're reading on leadership or memoirs from other quarterbacks, or are you, calling up a retired quarterback? Do you have mentors? Can you talk? You have your quarterback coach and your other coaches, but I'm just, what is the full range of educational resources you have at your disposal as a QB, and especially are there any that are kind of special that, because there's so much money involved in the NFL, you wouldn't see for most people or most jobs?
For me personally, anecdotally, the most important ones were the other quarterbacks I was around, especially when I was younger. I was really fortunate to be around my rookie year around a guy named Jake Delhomme, who was a guy who had to grind to get into the league and really understood kind of what that path looked like. And he basically really helped me with my approach to learning and how, we kind of made it a priority. And then from there, just trying to, pull and soak everything that you possibly can from each of these, not only coaches, but players, and realize that, hey, I want to be me. I'm not going to try to be anybody else, but can I hijack some of the habits or some of the tendencies that these other guys have, whether they're intentionally trying to teach me or whether, I'm just going to take it from observation. And so being intentional about that, reading wise, I've always just enjoyed it. And I've always tried to read from a bunch of different sectors, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, biographical stuff. All those things have just always been interesting to me, and I usually keep multiple books going because I think of them as almost like conversations. I don't want to have the same conversation every single day, so I like to pick up and have different conversations. And that's just how I've always done it. I'm not in a race, to finish books. Sometimes they take months, sometimes they take days. So it's a combination of things. And so I've just always been curious in that regard. I never had to have someone tell me, it's been in vogue, to have a growth mindset, to be a lifelong learner. Those things that's just been my kind of forced approach for as long as I can remember. So that thing, not necessarily tethered to being a quarterback or not. I will say that some organizations, from as far as tools that might not be available to everyone else, I remember like leadership training where like John Maxwell and all these like big name companies would come in and do like, in-house conferences and workshops that, you're not going to get, at the local, YMCA.
Right.
You will get at a $1 million, massive company. And so those type of things are unique. How much I got out of those from just reading a book, it'd probably be more valuable to just read the book.
When you're reading, are you taking notes? Are you highlighting, underlining, annotating, anything like that?
Excellent question. So for a long time, I was just like a reader. Like, I mean, it depends on what you're reading, first of all.
Yeah.
So let's just assume that I'm reading something that I need to have 2 feet on the ground, like not a beach read or not a pool read. I am a note taker, and both in the margins and kind of like if I really like it, I'll note take it, take a picture of it, email it to myself so I can kind of catalog those type of things. For the longest time, when I went back to school to get my master's, I was a highlighter, and I had one of my early professors at doc school was like, the major difference between the academic rigor, between what you're going to need from that to this, is master's students highlight, doctoral students write notes. And so that was kind of my first kind of like intentional, someone being like, hey, you got to ramp up, your capacities to recall some of these things and what you're doing. And so that's just always been my take on it now. So I always have to write or read with a pen or something like that.
So when you're saying taking notes, is that in the margins or is that a separate notebook that you have with you?
It's all of the above.
Okay.
I was a guy who carried a notebook around for a long time.
Yep.
Now I'm more of just to email it to myself because I can just kind of dump it into a file and know where it's at and don't have to worry about holding on to some notebook or carrying a pen on me all the time. But if I'm at home, reading in here or on the porch, I'm a note kind of in the margin type guy. And then I always crack up. I always forget that I write these notes. And I'm pretty honest because I'm just like with myself. Things don't make sense to me, or I think things are BS. And then I'll farm out the book or let someone loan the book, and they'll be like, "Man, you're really harsh on that."
Yeah.
But it's
So how do you what does that look like when you email them to yourself? How do you catalog or organize those in your email? Are you using Gmail or something else?
Yeah, just Gmail.
Okay.
I mean, it's not very scientific. It's just folders, whether it's football catalog, football kind of files, leadership files, different guys that I've gone kind of down deep rabbit holes with as far as reading as much as I can possibly get my hands on those type of things.
And then is that searchable? Like, what can you give us an example of when you think of something and you go into Gmail? Like, how do you actually go back and use that?
Yeah, I wish it was. I'm sure there are many better ways to do it. Mine is just kind of homemade. I used it a lot when I was creating the curriculum for the class that I teach.
Yep.
Whether it's just kind of like an inspirational quote or a nugget, like now I went down a deep rabbit hole with Nelson Mandela at one point, and so his connection to sport was really powerful for me. And so there are a bunch of quotes that I had from a bunch of different his kind of texts that I wanted to use, and so it was much easier than just fanning through a bunch of highlighted passages. It was like, hey, Control F, Nelson Mandela. This is the quote. I knew it said something with sports, and there it is.
Do you use any other software to like Microsoft OneNote or Evernote? Do you use anything like that to keep track of notes?
I did when I was doing my literature review.
Okay.
When I was going back to school, I don't use Evernote, or what was the other one? There was another one.
OneNote.
M or something.
Notion. Oh, M.
I forget
I don't
what
know.
It's called. There's probably 2 laptops ago.
Mendeley.
Mendeley.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you what you did for your dissertation. What kind of citation manager and any other software tools, or was there anything that you used just for that you don't use anymore that you can talk about?
Both those, Mendeley and Evernote. I use both of those.
Okay.
And they were great for the time. I just
Yeah.
I don't have to do that stuff anymore. I'm a recovering academic.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your leadership course. I'm curious how you apply some of those frameworks to Brady and Belichick and some of the. I also want to talk about Josh McDaniels a little bit because I don't think he gets much credit, and I think he deserves more credit for what he's done and his role. Because I don't know how many people know this, but the offensive coordinator is the one who's calling all the plays, and so maybe you can talk a little bit about him and just in general, uh, and then we can get to the leadership stuff on and how you apply your perspective onto those guys.
Yeah, so again, my experience with Josh is pretty limited to just those few weeks. I can say that I remember being just startled with how young he was. That was probably 2005. I almost remember him like sitting on his feet in meetings, that type of thing where it was just kind of, he was this little young guy. And the thing, I think at the time, he might even be younger than Tom, I don't remember, but I considered them peers. And so, it's a little strange in most sports kind of normal mental models. You have this kind of antiquated view of the old coach, instilling wisdom on the young player. Mm-hmm. Well, in the league, that can flip really quickly, where all of a sudden the coach is younger than the player. Mm-hmm. And so what that relationship looks like is always a little strange. I think Josh was always great about being really explicit about what he thought his role was. He thought his role was to make you a better player. Everything we're going to do is to make us play better as a unit. And so when you realize that he has things that he can offer the unit that will allow us to perform at a higher level, it creates that type of respect and understanding and being coached hard and all those things that I think that they do and have done for a really long time. I don't know enough about Josh to say like what went wrong with Denver or I'm sure how things have grown and evolved over the course of the years, but I think he deserves a good amount of credit for what they've been able to do in New England, mostly not so much calling plays, but more the adaptability of that system. And so from going to be able to be like a really, Brady, Moss, best passing unit, Gronk ever really at that point in time, to being a really run heavy, big guy, more of what Belichick's kind of past is like. And so that ability to adapt and morph and really do it on a weekly basis, unlike most organizations, I think is a testament to Josh. And so I'll be fascinated to see what happens with him as kind of, Bill exits at some point and what he looks like without Tom and without Bill in the next chapter of it.
So before we get to the leadership, one other thing, is there anything in terms of the physics? You've got this big bookshelf. You've got, if people want to check out your NFL films video, there's some clips in there about you defending your thesis and that whole thing, but your office space, they can get a little bit more pictures of video of that. But how do you organize this room that you're in now, is that your study? And like, how do you organize physically? Do you have binders or 3-ring binders or folders, file cabinets? Like, what does that look like for you?
No, I'm a digital. I'm a hard copy book guy.
Okay.
I do like reading hard copy or hard books. So that's what you see here. And honestly, 18 months ago, I had it organized perfectly. When I started doing the YouTube thing, my wife was like, "Your background looks terrible. You need to put football stuff in there." And I was like, "I don't really care." And she just did it. So now it's not organized as well as it should be organized, but it looks nicer and it looks like it's somewhat related to football.
Yeah.
So that part of that is that I do everything. I try to do as much as I possibly can in the digital space as far as how I categorize any type of like learning stuff or teaching stuff that I use, whether it's coaching high school football, coaching or teaching an undergrad class. That's just how my mind operates in Excel. I think in Excel. That's kind of how I categorize things.
A lot of people don't think like that, though, in terms of Excel. People know Word, but a lot of people don't use. So where does that come from? that's interesting.
Yeah, that comes from just doing qualitative and quantitative analysis is kind of a general kind of way I learned it. I'm comfortable doing pivot tables, things like that. I think I like having the capacity to think kind of in that linear kind of macro space, but then being able to filter stuff and be able to do simple formulas that I think are super easy. And if I don't know it, I just YouTube how to do it. It's pretty simple.
And I'll do a little plug for your thesis if anybody wants to check it out. It's examining hybrid gift philanthropy in Division I intercollegiate athletics, a mixed method study. So when you were saying quantitative and qualitative, I just read the abstract earlier today, but you did a survey of every single D1 athletic department in terms of what funding they do, and so quantitative is numbers, qualitative is non-numerical, like, what words would you use to describe something, stuff like that. So that's where you got into the Excel and the spreadsheet stuff, is through that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. And really before that, in more of the classes where they teach you how to be a researcher. But yeah, that's
okay.
Definitely, once you get into that level of it, they have better software, but it's just kind of like a free, not free, but like a starting spot. It's a nice way to do it.
And then your leadership class. So can you talk about what's unique about your curriculum? Not just in terms of, it's got more of a focus on sports, but what would you say are your personally unique perspectives on leadership? What do you think of the various academic leadership frameworks out there? And then how can you tie that back to some of your experiences in the NFL and some of the guys I mentioned, Belichick, Brady, McDaniels, and other guys that you played with?
Yeah, so that's a massive question. And so the essence of it is, I love sports. I really like leadership. I like higher ed, the space of higher ed, and so I wanted to see if I could blend those things. And it's a lot easier to do that if you've gone through the program. I know all the people that I need to talk to create the curriculum for those type of things, get it approved, whatever the kind of leaps you got to go through that process. So, But for me, it was about kind of two things. One, it's taking the kind of the field of leadership studies, which was like any sort of academic field, always going to be kind of jargon heavy, abstract, theory. And then what does it look like on the practitioner level? So what are people who are actually practicing leadership? What are they doing? They're probably not using terms that we use in the theory world of how we describe these type of behaviors. And so I try to blend those things and just make them a little more real. My class is tilted to not be towards kind of the student athlete experience. We definitely talk about college athletics, but it's not an athlete class. It is a class for people who love sport, whether that's they played young, or they're a fan, or somehow sport has impacted their life, and they're also interested in this process of influence that is called leadership for most of us. And so we blend those through. We study leadership through the medium of sports, and so I try to use the entire sport experience, what you can kind of fall under anywhere, with what's your life trajectory or what you try to prioritize is, and go from there. And so we focus, the two theories that we focus on, not just because they made me do this when I created the courses, I picked a couple. And so we do transformational leadership and a little bit of adaptive leadership, but really we teach kind of a spattering of every core theory that allows them to kind of pick and choose what they want to talk about. But it's really easy to talk with, if you, how much really want to get into leadership theory here, but transformational leadership is a really common thrown out. People love saying that theory, love talking about it within the discipline, but it's very hard to practice and almost impossible to practice over the course of a lifetime. There might be times where you fall under a role that allows you to be transformational, but very rarely are you a transformational leader the entire scope of your life or the time you practice leadership. And so just understanding better parts of what that looks like. And I think sports are fun. Not only are they fun, they create an energy, environment unlike anything else. You don't see that. You don't see on a higher education campus. You don't see, this energy all over campus for the next, debate. You do see it on a Saturday, depending on what school you're at. So those type of things where they resonate with the energy, the vibe, all those things that we try to capitalize on, blending those things and making it a better experience, because many of them were probably, many of them are athletes, many of them were athletes, many of them will be coaches, many of them aspire to be in sports as a profession, many of them will practice leadership in some different medium, and so I just try to provide as many takeaways as I possibly can, and also make it fun and enjoyable, and it is fun and enjoyable for me. That's the main reason I do it. I like to make an impact with them, but I also enjoy the content.
Transformational leadership always had sort of a religious connotation for me. Can you talk at all about if you see that and how you could, if you have a religious life or whatever that is, how do you connect that to leadership?
It doesn't. For me, that's not necessarily true.
Okay.
There are there are a handful of leadership theories that I think are dog whistles
Yep.
for different religions,
Mm-hmm.
and I try to point those out. It's a fine line because I teach at a Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
The University of San Diego is a Catholic school, so part of their mission is that theology-based learning and curriculum.
Right.
But I try to, it's just part of the deal as
Yeah.
far as when you're unpacking these things into their absolute genesis. And so I just try to name them, provide them, as much information as possible. And if they have more information, we can certainly talk about it, within the kind of outside the structure of a group class discussion.
One of the things I thought was interesting about Ray Lewis's leadership is that when he was younger, he was a junior deacon, and he had sort of a background in that. So I'm just curious if you see anything interesting about his leadership when he was on with the. I'm blanking on the team name.
The Ravens.
Ravens, yeah.
No, I mean
Okay.
I think he's an interesting case example just because he's a pretty polarizing guy for a number of reasons.
Yep.
And I think there is certainly, it's hard to deny that part of what I would consider his type of leadership resonates with some people, and it's turned some people off, but it certainly worked for a long time in Baltimore.
Is there anything else you can tell us about Jake Delhomme and what you learned from him, or any of the other learning things? Anything else you learned from him, or and just this mentorship relationship? A lot of people want to have a mentor. A lot of people don't have any mentors. So maybe you could talk about how do you understand that kind of relationship, and how do you cultivate a mentor who, with a quarterback, it's even a little bit more difficult because there's that competition.
Yeah, I'm by no means an expert in this space.
Okay.
I will say that I tried to be as intentional as I could as far as cultivating those relationships, but I didn't necessarily think of it as, hey, Jake's my mentor.
Okay.
It was more of, I want to learn as much as I can from this guy. I wasn't trying to sap him for knowledge and make it kind of a one-way street relationship. We were friends and we played together at the same team. But if he was doing something, I would ask, hey, why are you doing that? And he would, be honest with me and tell me this is what I learned. And I know he learned it from another quarterback. So, once you do that, you feel like, you have a kind of a responsibility to share that information. Now I just share it on the YouTube space as opposed to, the next guy in line.
And what about, we've only got a few minutes left, so I want to ask a couple quick questions. One of them is about, now that you're coaching a team, how has that changed your perspective on things, and how do you think about transferring knowledge to your players and your quarterback and just the whole team and the assistant coaches?
Yeah, I mean, there's not one blanket answer to that. It's a layered kind of thing, and so
is it maybe there's something you do differently that most people don't do, or any things that are kind of new or on the cutting edge that?
I mean, I don't know, and if there were, I don't know if I'd share them.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think it's less about kind of teaching knowledge of football at the high school level, and just more about teaching more life skills and things that are transferable beyond the football field, just through the medium of high school sports and high school football. It gets a little bit different with the relationship with the quarterbacks, just because I am invested in them. I'm the quarterback coach. I'm the offense coordinator. It's a different type of relationship than perhaps, like the fifth string, safety. Not that I wouldn't have a relationship there, but it's just different because of the time invested and the kind of, anecdotal experience of myself. And so those type of things are different and a little bit more, spend more time together, more invested in their progress, their understanding, their learning, their development, how we teach it, those type of things. And then as far as the assistant coaches, I try to be as very intentional as possible, understanding that the role of the head coach is to basically coach the coaches, and then I want to empower them to go out and be kind of their, professor in their scope of what they're being asked to teach and educate. And so it's a fine line because I oversee the offense to be able to not micromanage those type of things, but at the same time, what we talked about earlier about the installations, I believe that there is value in the unit or the team hearing from one voice consistently. So
Yep.
they hear my voice, and then they hear kind of the nuance and detail and the everyday kind of grind from the position coach. So that's kind of how the structure is set up. It's worked well. That's how I think it works well. And so I'm always trying to know what the aspirations of our assistant coaches are. We have a full spectrum. Some coaches that I have to kind of plea and, I beg for them to come back every year because they want to get out of it.
Yeah.
And some coaches who want to be head coaches. And so not everybody needs the same type of mentoring. Not everybody needs the same type of time investment, kind of those type of things. So I try to be really individualized with what those assistant coaches kind of plans, my relationships with them go.
So like the playbook, is that something that's printed out and you hand that out? Is that something that you have online? And do you have like a shared folder? Like how do you do that?
Spot for me right now. So I was very anti-playbook last year, was my first year coaching. And really it was more as kind of a bookend for me to know that if there wasn't a playbook, that means that everybody had to kind of have the knowledge built up in themselves, that I could never have too much. I thought it was a way to kind of confine myself to not having too much volume of an offense. Well, this year, our off season's basically been flipped on its head. So what the things that we normally do as far as the off season preparation, getting together, meeting, field work, all those things we can't do. So we have to do virtually. So we do video installations. We now have a digital playbook. And so, all these things that I never wanted to do, it took me all of year 2 to get into them. So
yeah. So let's wrap up with maybe you can tell people more about your channel, where they can find information about you. I was going to ask you if you're planning on writing a book or is there anything else you're planning on doing in the future people can look out for? People can obviously go to your website. I think it's the qbschool.com. They can sign up to your newsletter and get updates there. They can follow you on Twitter, which I think is at the QB School. But maybe you can just give how people can stay in touch with you and where they can find your different materials.
Yeah, sure. The place I'm at the most is the YouTube channel, QB School. Then I do spend some time on Twitter. I want to say it's at the _QB_school.
I'll put in the description all this stuff.
Yeah, and then probably the things coming in the pipeline that I'm most excited about is I'm going to transition into the kind of online course world. So I have a course coming out soon on just RPOs. That's probably a little bit, you got to be a football junkie to get into that type of stuff. But so there'll be a deep dive in the RPO world. What does that stand for, RPO? Run pass options.
Okay.
So just a specific type of play, which is probably one of my favorite types of play. So I'm excited to do that. I'm literally in the middle of the project right now, so I'm deep in that. Cool. And then I've had a book kind of in the works for a long time, and it will be at some point one will come out. It's probably not going to be this next calendar year, but I'm still recovering from the dissertation, so it's not necessarily fired up to go get some more, crush out some pages, but it's coming down the pipeline. At some point, the YouTube channel will evolve into a little bit more than just, it's a lot of X's and O's right now, just because that's what seems like the audience resonates with that. And so it's kind of evolved from an NFL centric to a college football centric to kind of just quarterback offense centric to, it will evolve into more of the leadership influence world as I dive into it. I did a little bit of the book review that you mentioned. I have more book reviews coming out.
Yeah, that was really good.
I like blending those worlds, but at the same time, I realize that the vast majority of people who subscribe to the channel and who are over, and then the deepest dive for my content is on the QB School Patreon community. And so that stuff is really long form video content that can basically like be in an NFL quarterback meeting. And so just different types of content that I enjoy. Those are the things that I like doing. And so I just find a group of people that want to support it and help continue it.
Yeah, and for anybody who's a fan of the game, when I first found your channel, I was like, wow, I can't believe nothing else. I've never seen anything like this. And you do explain things very well. If you just watch the game, it gives you a whole new perspective. But I find it so fascinating when you give that perspective of being in the pocket and the decisions you're making. We didn't have time to get to it today, but the whole process of how do you read a defense before the snap of the ball? What are you look to one receiver and then the next and then the next, and that whole thinking process that has to happen in a few seconds. The whole choreography of that is really fascinating. So I really recommend that people check out the YouTube channel. And there's a lot of stuff it seems like you're publishing stuff every few days. So I'll put some links to a few of the things that I like the best. The quarterback coach video, the Belichick, the 6 books review, how to learn an offense. Those were 3 of the big ones for me, but there's a lot of great stuff there. So JT, thanks a lot for coming on, and we'll look forward to your book. And I was going to say, like, you really have a voice, and you could be on TV, you could have a show. Like, there's this thing in New England where they have the fifth, I think it's called the fifth quarter, but they've got a guy, I forget his name, but he will interview Belichick after each game or before each game or something. And they have it's on a TV and they'll draw stuff on it. So I think you could do stuff like that. And that's part of what made me think of Chris Collinsworth. So it'll be interesting to see where you go next in the different projects. And thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay.